Hey everyone, welcome back to Transform Your Workplace. This is a podcast all about creating a great workplace culture. I'm your host, Brandon Laws, and today we're diving into a topic that's so essential for anybody in leadership. This is about the power of relationships. I'm excited to have Josh Durham back. He's a good friend of mine. Josh is the owner of Gamut Project Solutions. And for those who are listening for the first time, or those of you who've been following along with the episodes with Josh, we've been unpacking the foundational 5 leadership principles: agreements, communication, leadership, agency, and today we're wrapping it up with relationships. In our conversation, Josh shares some incredible insights about how relationships are the cornerstone of effective leadership. We explore how our innate human needs to survive, belong, and become influence the way we connect with others, both personally and professionally. Josh also opens up about his own experiences with his gift of failure story, about navigating high stakes projects and how leaning into relationships made all the difference. Before we jump into the episode with Josh, I want to give a big shout out to our sponsor, Xenium HR. Xenium is doing amazing work to elevate leaders through their learning development programs like custom workshops, virtual workshops, on-demand learning, and the People Leadership Foundation's cohort. So if you're looking to grow and make a real impact in your organization, be sure to visit xeniumhr.com and check out the learning and development programs. If you find value in today's episode and you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, share this episode with your network. Let's spread the word about how important it is to build strong relationships and transform your workplace culture. All right, let's get into the conversation with Josh Durham. Josh, it is such a pleasure to have you back on the show. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, Brandon. Good to see you again, man.
So we've covered your foundational 5 leadership principles. And for listeners who are just tuning in for the first time, go back and listen. We covered several principles: agreements, communication, leadership, agency. And today we're going to talk about relationships. So in the context of your leadership principles, the foundational 5, what does relationships mean to you in the context of this conversation?
Yeah, I always tell folks as I'm starting this session when we're doing the full series that we're doing relationships last, not because it's any less important than the other 4. If anything, it's probably the most important thing in business, especially in leadership. But the first 4 principles are really introspective. They're focused on a lot of things that you as an individual can do to better lead. And relationships, as we'll talk about today, is in the word, right? It's about how you engage with other folks and yourself as well. So, I say if you can't have a good relationship with yourself, you're never going to have positive ones with other folks either, right? Yeah, relationships, from a leadership perspective, is paramount to successfully getting other folks to follow you.
Yeah, and I actually like that you do this last, because without the other things, I don't know how you can have good relationships. So having agreements with people, being able to communicate effectively, leading others and yourself, and then taking ownership for things and having internal locus of control, like those things all would feed into how you develop trust and relationships with people.
Yeah. See, you've been listening the whole time. You got it.
Yeah. I figured it out. How many people don't get this though? Like how many people have struggled that then they wonder why their relationships are not as strong as they should be?
Yeah, no, that's just it, right? Like, if you can't master or have a good grasp of these other 4 principles, your relationships are going to struggle. And that's not because Josh Durham says so. That's just the way the world is, right? So no one's ever surprised when I lay it out that way at the beginning of this session that we have to grasp and master these other 4 concepts if we want to have positive relationships.
Yeah. You said in your presentation at some level that we're, as humans, wired to survive, belong, become. How does that play a role in the relationships that we have?
It's everything. Yeah, it's, anyone who ever comes in the Gamut guidepost, right up there in the wall, when you walk in, you'll see those 3 big words: survive, belong, and become. We've kind of danced around that terminology throughout the other principles. But really, in relationships is where we start talking about the neuroscience of what that means. The human brain is wired to, desire those three primal needs. They want to, we want to survive. Back in the day, it meant running from the saber-toothed tiger that's jumping out of the bush, right? And now it means getting a secure paycheck so that we can pay all of our bills and have, shelter and all that fun stuff. So that's that survival instinct is the basic form of human need. And then the belonging piece is, since the beginning of humans, we've depended on other humans in order to survive. We depended on being in a safe group. That's that belonging piece. So we all desire to have positive relationships because we know those are the things that will help us, survive this crazy world. And then the last piece that's the human desire to transform and grow into a better version of ourselves. We are always changing, and we're trying to change for the good. We're trying to become better than we were the day before. And the interesting thing about the become piece, and we talk about this in principle number 5 a lot, is a human can't go through positive transformation. They can't become a better version of themselves if the first two basic instincts, survival and belonging, aren't being served. You'll always kind of sit in this sympathetic state, this fight or flight state, where you don't know if you're going to survive. You don't know if you're going to belong to a group. If you're sitting there, you'll never be able to transform into a better version of yourselves. And that's because the science says so, not Josh. That's the way the brain is wired. And that's what the science has shown.
Yeah, and we're talking about this at the individual level, but that concept applied to like an organization. Do you talk about that in your series about survive, belong, become, what that means at the organizational level?
We do, especially the leadership role in that, right? I tell folks, especially when I'm doing this with executive groups, your number one job. I know, leaders have all sorts of jobs and tasks, right? Roles and responsibilities, but your number one job, as a leader is to create that psychologically safe workplace, whether it's a construction site or an office setting. It does not matter. If you're not creating a psychologically safe workplace where folks feel like they are going to survive in that environment, feel like they belong to that team, they're never going to transform into the high-performing team member that you want them to become. It's just that simple.
I pulled a little nugget out of your presentation about spreading goodwill generously. What does that mean in terms of influencing the relationships that we have?
Yeah, that's kind of the principle behind the principle of relationships, right? I say spread goodwill generously because a positive approach is going to pay dividends. Where this principle started was actually the negative version of that, which is spite begets spite. If you're cynical, you're spiteful, your life is like a mirror. That's going to get mirrored back to you, tenfold at least. Spreading goodwill generously and bringing that positive approach means you're going to get that back. 100% of the time, no, that's not what I'm saying. But more often than not, if that's the approach you're bringing as a leader or just a contributing team member, either way, that's going to get mirrored back to you. And I can tell you from experience, I've seen it both ways and I've experienced it both ways. When I've been the cynic, and the spiteful one, and I put that out into the world, it comes right back to me. And same when I've brought goodwill and a positive approach, which you'll hear a lot about in my gift of failure story today, it comes back to you in a goodwill and in a positive way as well.
What are some like behaviors or actions that fall in line with spreading goodwill generously?
This is an important distinction I make for folks when, I'm giving this discussion, because what I'm not telling people is be happy-go-lucky, and click your heels all day long and everything's going to be fine. That's not what I'm talking about here. Okay. That's ridiculous. That's not life. Life is hard, but when I say, bringing a positive approach, what that means to me is, doesn't mean that, you have to be happy all the time. Being happy is a moment, right? This is a moment. Right? We're happy in this moment. It's not a state of mind. You can't always be happy. When I say staying positive, that means that even on the hardest days in your life, there's better ones coming. And I've had to remind myself of that many, many, many times. And in all of those gift to failure stories I've shared with your audience so far, and the one I'll share again today, I had to remind myself there is light at the end of the tunnel. It is not all gloom and doom. You are still alive and on this earth, and there is still opportunities for better days to come. So that's that. When I say positive approach, that's the kind of attitude that I'm, and actions I'm talking about bringing every day.
Yeah, that's well said. I've heard you talk about this before, saying that people wear masks. And what does that mean? What kind of masks do people wear, and how does that influence relationships?
Yeah. So we talked about masked leadership versus purpose driven leadership in principle number 3. And in relationships, what I'm talking about, with the kind of mask that we can wear, or the mask that you put on when the lizard brain is triggered. The lizard brain is those primal instincts to survive, right? It's really important that you recognize when your counterpart or your spouse or someone you're in a relationship with, when one of those masks has slipped on their face, because what they're telling you is they don't feel safe. They don't feel like they're going to survive. They don't feel like they belong. And those masks they usually manifest in ugly ways. The kinds of masks I'm talking about is, when you're in a tough conversation with somebody, whether it's a negotiation or other, they may seem really defensive. They may seem like a bully. They may be volatile, or maybe they're just super reactionary. Maybe they're even being untruthful to you, right? We've all had an interaction where someone you figure out someone's lying to you, right? And that never ends well. So those are those masks that your job in a relationship is to recognize that we all wear them from time to time. And you need to recognize that in the person you're talking to earlier, because it tells you some really important things about what's going on for them. And it gives you an opportunity to try to de-escalate the situation. And we give some tools to our participants in the Foundational 5 of how you do that, so that you can move forward. You're trying to get folks back into a parasympathetic state of mind rather than a sympathetic state. You're trying to get them out of fight or flight and into the intuitive part of their brain, up top here.
How much of a role does empathy play in the relationships that we have?
It's huge. And, we talked about, the difference between sympathy and empathy, I think, in one of our earlier discussions. And sympathy is a very important emotion to be able to have as a human, but it's much different than empathy. Empathy is the ability to meet someone where they're at and find common ground, right? Put yourself in their shoes, all those types of phrases. Again, when you're, having a tough dialogue with somebody, if you can't put yourself in their shoes and meet them where they're at, you're always going to have arguments that are volatile and don't end very well for either party. So empathy, for instance, when we're in a negotiation, even if you don't agree with the other person's position, that's okay. You still have to be able to put yourself in their shoes and see where they're coming from, so that you can eventually move the conversation or the negotiation forward.
Yeah, I was thinking about you when I was sort of prepping for this conversation. Is like, you've been in some high stakes situations with some huge building projects. And I mean, we talked about all these principles, and at the end of the day, when you're coming to the table and negotiating or renegotiating agreements, whatever it may be, how do you think about those relationships that you have with the person sitting across from the table with you?
Yeah, early in my career, it was all black and white, right? I got the facts. I know that I'm right.
That does not sound like you.
Yeah, that's true. And I didn't care, if they were having a bad day, or if these folks that I'm talking to got set up with a bad scope of work by the people above them in their organization. I don't care, right? It's facts. It's black and white, and I'm right, you're wrong, right? That's where I kind of started at. And I think a lot of people go there, right? Early on. But I found that over time and through some very complicated and expensive negotiations that I've been engaged in, there's a lot more to it than just the facts and just black or white, because you're talking to another human who, is going through all sorts of other stuff besides just whatever's happening in your workplace or in the project that you're working with them on. And that's where, that empathy, component comes in. And that's where real relationship building comes from, when you're going through tough negotiation. You can go through a really hard negotiation and still end up with friends on the other side of it if you approach it with empathy.
Yeah. One thing I know about business and then us as individuals is that nothing ever stays the same. We're always constantly navigating change and adapting to the world that's changing around us. Do relationships help you navigate those moments a little easier?
Yeah. If you are in a healthy relationship,
because you could do it together versus...
if you can do it together. Yeah. we talk about, the matrix of change, which is not something made up by Josh, but has been studied by scientists and psychologists for many, many decades. And, the human brain, when it goes through a large status quo change in its life, whether it's something happening on a project, that's a big change to the project as itself, or if it's something in their personal life, whatever it is, when someone's status quo, the way they know the world changes dramatically. We witnessed this during the pandemic, right? The human brain goes through 4 main stages. And when you're in a relationship with somebody, I think understanding and having empathy for someone as you see them going through these different stages of change is really important. This is for the large changes in someone's life. This is not for someone deciding to, get a latte instead of a mocha someday. Like, fine.
That's a hard decision, Josh.
For some people it may be, and I get that. But, we're talking about large changes. So the first stage, that the human brain goes through typically when a big change is presented to them is shock and denial. Like, no way that this is real. There's no way that this is happening. I don't believe it, right? And then they'll move through that stage, and typically stage 2 is some version of anger and fear, where they don't know how this change is going to impact them personally. Are they going to be able to survive this change? Are they going to still belong in the group once this change is completed, right? So that's stage 2. And then the next stage, if you're able to stay, within that relationship, keep them on course through this change, the next stage is typically acceptance and exploration of the change. Like, okay, this thing is real, whatever this change is, I understand that now. And I'm curious, like, how can I navigate my way through this change? How can I be a part of this change? This actually seems like something that's survivable, and maybe at the end of the day will help me transform into a better version of myself. And then once you get through stage 3, that acceptance piece and exploration of the change, eventually you're going to get to commitment. Like, okay, this change is happening. I'm excited about getting it to the finish line and setting a new status quo for myself. So that same change model can be someone buying a car, or it can be going through a multi-million-dollar negotiation with somebody, or it can be buying a house, right? Any of these kind of big changes can go through that exact same change model. And your job, especially if you're in a negotiation with somebody or you're leading someone through, a large change in your organization, there's 5 key ways to, map out the change to successfully get someone there. The first is starting with the how and the why. How did we get to here, and why is this change even happening? And why is it necessary, right? You always got to start with why and explain to folks the reasoning. That's the first part of it. Then map the route. Here's how we're going to get through this change together, whether it's an organizational change or it's a negotiation. Show your counterpart or show the folks that you're leading, what the checkpoints are and how we're going to get through the change. The third piece is you got to understand the effort and impact whatever this change is going to have both on yourself and also the other people that you're going through. And that's that empathy piece, right? Having empathy for the fact that big changes do have an impact on human lives. And then number 4 is, you have to be the steady presence and the guide during the change. Like we said earlier, people are going to put on these various masks when they don't feel safe. And that especially happens in stage 1 and 2 of a change model. And your job as the leader, of the change is to stay steady and just be present during it. And you're acting as a guide along the change journey. And then last but not least is understanding and recognizing change fatigue. And change fatigue is a real terminology not made up by Josh, but something that's been studied for a long time, especially in my industry, which is construction. Change fatigue can happen across all business types in the world. And your job as someone in a relationship with somebody when you're taking them through a change is to recognize when they're fatiguing, like there's too much change happening in their life. It may not all have to do with you, right? They could be moving, or they could be putting their, parents into some sort of care facility. They could be doing a remodel on their house. It could be all sorts of things outside of your place of business where you're working with them. So understanding the symptoms of change fatigue is really important. I'll summarize them really quick here. The first one is disengagement, when someone seems apathetic or emotionally checked out. Exhaustion, someone seems to always lack energy. They're staring off to space when you're talking to them about the change. They always seem tired, right? Absenteeism, when folks stop showing up consistently to either work or to your meetings. They're missing meetings. And then confusion, someone's displaying poor decision making or, just not on the same page with you somehow. Then obviously conflict. There's really bad tension in the relationship. Healthy tension is okay in relationships, right? You got to have some sort of healthy tension, some give and take. But when there's constant conflict and turmoil in the relationship, that probably means that person's getting burned out on change fatigue. And then the last, but certainly not least, is cynicism, where someone's always complaining. They're super skeptical. They're, maybe they're shaming people for, various reasons. They're resistant, right? So your job, again, trying to be the steady presence and guide when you're taking folks through a large change, recognize those symptoms. And then sometimes you have to take your pedal off the gas, right? And slow the change process down so that you don't lose that person that you're trying to pull through whatever this change is. Again, whether it's a negotiation or some sort of organizational change. I think I said change about 100 times there. But
we all go through change. And you've mentioned several times too, just being the trusted guide. And you've mentioned that throughout our other conversations as well. When did you come to that realization that you need to be a trusted guide in order to really impact others, organizations, be a true leader, build relationships, all that?
Yeah, I think actually the project we're going to talk about today, which was a project I did much later in my career, that was really the first project where, again, I was the head operations project manager for this multi-$100 million project, had a fairly large team, on our side to manage the job. And I was really the first time in my career where I realized, I can't wear the cape the entire time. I can't be the hero for everything here. This project is too big. That's not what the other folks on my team really need from me. They really need someone who's been there before, which I had, to be a guide for them so that they can grow, they can become or transform into a better version of themselves. Because we needed everyone on our team to be as high performing as possible if we wanted to have a shot at being successful on a project of that scale and complexity.
That's well said. That paints the picture pretty good. Well, let's get into it. So you always, at the end of every discussion, the principles that we're talking about, there's always a gift of failure. Your story, you show yourself, you're vulnerable, and I appreciate that. I think we can learn a lot from some of these stories. So let's get into it. Set the stage for us. What's the story about?
Okay. Well, I think your listeners at this point have a pretty good grasp of my relationship with water.
It rains a lot in Oregon. So.
Several of my stories have included water and fire, and today is no different. This project it's so hard to say I have a favorite project, but this one just has so many incredible stories, so many incredible people that I worked on with it, and such an important project for our community too, that I'm going to name some names. This is the Multnomah County Courthouse project at the west end of the Hawthorne Bridge in downtown Portland. And if you ever drive by downtown Portland, you can't miss it. It's a beautiful building right on the water there. And it's one that for many years I wanted to be a part of before it was actually real. So to give a little backstory here, I started pursuing this project about 2 years before we actually got it. And the Multnomah County Courthouse, for folks who don't know, the original one was over 100 years old, and it had become seismically unsafe, and just frankly, it just didn't have the capacity for the population that it now serves. And so Multnomah County had been spending, the last 40 years trying to find the right location and the right situation to replace the existing courthouse. And so studies have come and gone over many, many decades. And so back in, 2015, 2014, I caught word that this project was now coming back to life. The county is very serious about it, and I really wanted to be a part of this project. I, already built several buildings in downtown Portland, and I wanted to continue to change the skyline for the good in Portland, and especially a project like this, a once in a lifetime project for the state. There's never, in our lifetime, there's never going to be another Multnomah County Courthouse built. This is the one, right? And so, I really believed, that this was a really important project. And so I went to my leadership and said, hey, I want to be part of the pursuit team for this job. Even if I don't end up being the project manager on it, I want to help us get this project. And and they said, okay, well, good luck. Here's the last, 40 years of data, that we've pulled together, and, the different exercises we've done with the county to, help analyze it for them. and all these, other project managers from, Hoffman that had pursued it previously. And I was like, wow, okay, here we go. And so, start going to evening meetings. I'm still finishing that other multi-$100 million project in another state. So I'm getting off airplanes and I'm landing in Portland and going to evening meetings to go to open houses and just to start learning more about the project and start making connections with the county and building those relationships early on. And so fast forward to, I think, late 2015, if I'm remembering right, we actually won the project. Every large contractor in the state wanted this job. This is a huge project. And so it was very competitive, but we won. And so it's like, wow, we got the job. About 2 seconds later in my gut, I'm like, oh my gosh, we got the job. This is going to be so hard, especially coming off of what was another super challenging multi-year project for me. Like, wow, all right, buckle up. Here we go again. So that's kind of the backstory. So then we get into this project, and the county and Hoffman and the design team wanted to do this super collaboratively. So we had collaborative project delivery methods set up where we're all literally living together in the same space during the early design phases of the project, really trying to build relationships together way before we got shovels in the ground, and also help influence design and get really accurate cost information to the county really early in the project. And we're even bringing in large scale subcontractors that potentially could be part of the project to get really good pricing and give design input while things are very preliminary. So we spent a solid year together, housed office together. That became our office space rather than all of us being in our own corporate offices. We all sat together, broke bread together, had many lunches and afternoon, beverages together during that time frame, and really built solid relationships that went beyond just this project, right? Which often is what happens in construction and all sorts of other projects too. So we go through that phase, and now we're on to building this thing, and we're about 3, maybe 4 months into the project. So we're digging. We got this big hole in the ground, right? We're digging and putting in the deep foundations and all that fun stuff. And it's a Sunday afternoon, and I'm actually playing catch with my nephew, and my phone rings, and I'm like, oh man, I don't want to look at it. So I didn't look at it, and then it rings again, and and I look at it, and it's a Portland police officer I know very well. And so I'm like, okay, I better answer this. Take the call, and they say, hey, I don't know if you know this, but I'm downtown, right now, and there's water flooding into your job site.
The water main burst
everywhere. I was like, what? How can that be? We're just digging a hole right now. We don't have any live water turned on. And they're like, yeah, I don't know, but I thought you should know. It looks like a geyser out here. You might want to check it out. And I was like, okay, so send me a picture. And they actually sent me a video. And, it looks like the Mississippi River is running into our job site from the middle of the street outside of it. I was like, oh my gosh, okay. So, I hand my nephew off to my wife, and I said, I got to go. And I'm driving downtown, and then, I go into Josh water mode, right? So I start calling the cavalry, trying to get everyone on site that I can on this Sunday afternoon. And I'm the first person to arrive. And yeah, sure enough, when I arrive right in the middle intersection, of First and Madison Street in Southwest Portland, looks like Old Faithful is going off right in the middle of the road. And there's probably 6 inches of water, on the surrounding streets. And I'm like, holy cow. Again, I don't know what's happening because we don't have any live water to the project yet. It's very early. And right about then, these news vans start pulling in from all different corners. No. And it's KGW, and it's Coin TV, and it's KATU, right? And they're all there, and the cameras come out, and I'm like, wow, this escalated very quickly. And so then some of our crew members start showing up. We start cordoning off the area, and several city blocks at this point are covered in water because it had been going off for a while. So I called PGE. I say, hey, you got to get down here. You got to shut down power to this district. There's water flooding everywhere. Call the Portland Water Bureau. They get there a few minutes later, and we're all kind of staring at each other like, what is it? I was like, I don't know. It's not us. We don't have any water on, but we do have a trench in the middle of the street. I think you, Portland Water Bureau, I think you have a big main somewhere down there, don't you? And they're like, yeah, we do. So they go about 2 blocks away. They find their shut off for the area. They turn off the water and it kills the guys. And so long story short, what it was, about 5 feet down below the trench that we were digging, their 60-year-old water main had given way. We didn't touch their pipe.
It just gave way.
It had nothing to do with us other than adjacency. Yeah, it just gave way. It was very old. And so we spent the next 12 hours, us, the construction team, the Portland Water Bureau, peeling back about 2 city blocks of street so we could expose this entire pipe and get it replaced. And it was really hard, right? It was a really hard moment, especially for me, just a few months earlier going through that other big water leak that happened on that project in the other state. And so I'm like, wow, how can this be? But in that moment, the county saw that we leaned into it right away. We reacted the way that, they would have wanted. And it was really a relationship building moment for everybody at the beginning of the job. Like, okay, we're together, we got this, right? So we move forward. And again, it was a really large project, $325 million job. So very large scale project. And it's a courthouse. And it was supposed to be, a 100-year courthouse. And it also, wanted to be an area of refuge type facility in the event that the big one hits. And so the goal with this building is that, if the Cascadian event ever happens, that within, I think it's 7 days of an event, that this building can be turned back on and used as area of refuge for people, have life safety systems. Yeah. So it had to be built very specifically and very structurally sound and also very structurally flexible in order to take that type of earthquake event. And with that means some very complicated construction methods needed to be implemented in order to get this done. And so throughout the life of the project, we're building this really hard project, and lots of changes are coming every day on the job that have dollars attached to them. And so we're into negotiations early on in the project with the county on some of these large structural changes that we're experiencing to get this job done. And all the while, we're getting these articles coming out about the project that are distractions. And, the one I always tell folks about is this one article came out about the solar panel system that we had designed to put on the roof. And it said it's going to take 150 years for the county to pay back the cost of the solar system being installed in the courthouse. And that's not true. That's not true at all. But it's Monoma County, so they always kind of have a target on their back, and people are always watching very closely how the money's being spent, rightfully so. But, these spicy articles are coming out during, the early phases of the structural build on the project. And when that particular one came out, I got a call from the head of PR at the county, and I'm standing up on their, the structural deck of the tower, and he says, "Josh, is it true?" And I said, "I don't know. What?" And he said, "Is it true that it's going to take 150 years to pay back the solar system, that we're putting on the roof of the courthouse?" I was like, no, absolutely not. Where are you getting that from? He's like, "An article just came out." And I was like, "Send it to me." So, he sent it to me, and I'm on the phone with him, and I read it. And I was like, "No, that's not true. We have all the data, the design team, we did the math. This is not an accurate statement." And, in that moment, I could have said, "So good luck with that." And, squishing that article, I got to go build your building, right?
Not my problem.
Yeah, I could have said not my problem. But again, instead of leaning away, leaned into the relationship and said, "Okay, let's have a meeting, and let's get the facts straight so that you can get these to the, the people who wrote the article, and we can get this corrected." Mm-hmm. And we leaned into it, and we helped them along even while we were, in the throes of a really hard job. So fast forwarding a long ways, there's about 82 more stories I want to tell you here, but fast forwarding to the end of the project here, this project finished in 2020. And for folks who recall, 2020 was a really tough year for Portland.
It sure was.
In a lot of ways. Yeah, the pandemic hits just months before, and we're trying to close this project up. And, then shortly after that, the social unrest of the summer of 2020 hits. And Monoma County Courthouse, for those who don't know, is right across the street from the federal courthouse where all that stuff happened that you saw on the news and made national news for weeks and weeks on end. And so we're living through that. We're trying to literally move the county into this building while, we're taking the onslaught of the protests and some riots that happened right there at our doorstep. We're replacing windows as fast as we can put them in because they're getting broken that quickly. It was a really hard way to end what was already a super, super challenging job. And the changes that I mentioned early in the project, those changes didn't stop during the structural phase. We had large changes and challenges during every single phase of that project. So there were millions of dollars on the line at the end of this project that we had to settle with the county while going through all these other large social issues that are happening in the world at the same time. And but all that to say, October of 2020, we opened the courthouse successfully. You know, we didn't have any sort of grand parade or anything like that because it was during the pandemic, right? So, you know, kind of a very low key opening to what otherwise would have been a pretty big celebration. But we get them in. And we're trying to finish these negotiations over millions of dollars for a wide variety of issues on the project. And then it's December of 2020, and I'm putting up Christmas lights at my house. I'm on about a 30-foot ladder, and my wife and kids are feeding Christmas lights up to me Sunday afternoon, and my phone rings. And I'm like, I'm not looking at that. I'm on a ladder. I don't want to know. I don't want to talk to anybody. I just want to put up these lights. And then it rings again. I was like, oh gosh, I better look. And so I look, and sure enough, it's someone connected to the courthouse project. And so I answer the phone, and they say there's been a leak. And I was like, no way. Yeah. And I said, what kind of leak? They said, it's a sprinkler leak. I was like, you got to be kidding me.
No.
And they had trouble isolating it. And it actually was not a leak for the record either. It was a sprinkler head in the middle of one of the small detention cells, kind of halfway up the building, spontaneously went off.
Oh, bizarre.
And to this day, we can't say for sure why it went off. No one was in there. We have camera footage of it. There was a whole investigation. It was really fun. But we can't determine why it went off, but it did. And it ran for quite a while before the county was able to turn it off because it was their building at this point, not ours. So we're not in the building. And it was a Sunday. So there's just a few sheriff's deputies in the building keeping it safe. So anyways, it ran for a long time, and it flooded out several floors of the building. Again, this made the news. Now I'm not telling you anything that's not in the public news. And we had to go in and make a bunch of repairs, mostly aesthetic, but also some things to, you know, their electrical systems that got, you know, some water touching them. We had to go in and make those repairs while still going through this multi-million-dollar negotiation. And again, that's another moment in this relationship where we could have leaned back and said, yeah,
it's your building now.
It's your building. Good luck with that, right? But we didn't, you know, and it would have been really easy to do the lean back and not engage in this issue. Instead, we leaned into it and we said, okay, let's do the investigation together, and we'll handle the repairs for you. You know, all the insurance money, all that we'll work it out. But we leaned back into the relationship because we both knew, the county and, you know, us, the contractor, we knew we needed each other for a lot of reasons, not just for this project, but for future projects and for the betterment of the community. We wanted this building to be, you know, functioning and serving the community that we built it for. So we needed each other. So we leaned back into that issue again. So we resolved it. We got it done. And then I'm going to fast forward just a few more months. Now it's late January, early February of 2021. And I am not making this up. I'm back up on that same 30-foot ladder, taking down those same Christmas lights I was putting up in December when I got the last phone call. And my phone starts ringing, Brandon. And I was like, no way. I'm not taking this call. I'm not looking at it. And then it rang 2 more times.
Oh, my goodness.
And I'm like, okay. So I take the phone out up on the ladder. And sure enough, it's the courthouse calling again. It's the Multnomah County Sheriff. And I answer the call and I say, if you tell me
there's water,
that there's another sprinkler leak, I'm telling you, I quit. I'm not coming, and you're going to have to call someone else. I am done. And they're like, no, that's not what happened. And I was like, okay, well, what is it? It's like, well, one of the stone panels on the building fell. And I said, oh my God, say that one more time. Did I hear you right?
Exterior?
Yeah, one of the exterior stone panels fell onto the sidewalk.
Oh my God.
And I got absolutely sick to my stomach. Like, you know, I felt like I was going to throw up in that moment. And I said, okay, I'll be there. And so I hang up the phone. I look down, you know, my wife and kids again are down there on the driveway receiving the Christmas lights. And, you know, my wife says, you know, she looks at me, was like, no way. I was like, no, it's not a sprinkler leak. And she said, okay, good. And I was like, it was actually a stone panel that fell. And she said, oh my God.
Yeah, that could have been catastrophic.
Is everyone okay? Yeah, in my head. And I said, this is the only time in my life I wished it was a water leak, right? How scary to have these, you know, several 100-pound stone panels falling. So she's like, all right, go do what you got to do. And, you know, this particular day in Portland history, this is the windiest day on recorded history on that day in Portland. So it was a super high wind day, and it was also snowing. And so I'm driving downtown in my truck. It's snowing sideways. My truck's getting pushed off the road, and I'm just thinking, who did I piss off in this world? Like, how am I here? This is insane. I get downtown. By the time I get downtown, there's 4 or 5 inches of snow on the ground, and the whole courthouse has been caution taped off or danger taped off by the sheriffs, just in case there's any other issues. And we're sweeping up pieces and parts of the stone that's buried in the snow and trying to put it in a wheelbarrow so we can take it inside and analyze, what happened, right? And it was just a very jarring event. And again, it's another moment. This is the county's building, not ours at this point. Another moment where we could have leaned back and said, good luck with that. Like, send us a warranty letter if you think it's a warranty issue. Like, we have no idea. But one more time, we leaned back into this thing. And again, we're still in negotiations for millions of dollars at this point on the project, millions of dollars that we need, and some subcontractors need as well. And we leaned back in one more time, with the county, said, okay, let's investigate this thing. Let's figure out what's happening. We do not want another one of these things to ever fall. And so we spent the next 7 months inspecting every single stone panel connection. And I'm talking about thousands and thousands of connections on this building to ensure that everything was safe. And, we had tolerances that were, millimeters that we're trying to meet to ensure that this building was safe. And we did. We checked every single location, brought in third parties who had nothing to do with the project just to make sure we could do everything we possibly could to give this building a clean bill of health. And we did. And at the end of the day, the difference between, this project and that one in the other state that I told you about, yes, there was lots of articles about the project, including, these water issues and that piece of stone falling. Yeah, there was articles about it. But the article that never came out on this project was that Hoffman and Multnomah County in a lawsuit, and they're going to court to settle this thing out. That never happened. Yeah. And that was because of the relationship building that happened at the beginning of the project. And then all those moments during the project where we had multiple potential relationship killing events happen to the team, we always stepped back to the table. We always sat back down at the table, even in the toughest moments when we didn't want to look at each other. Yeah. And we worked it out and we settled that. No one was happy with how that project got settled financially, and, which is probably a good sign that, really it was fair. No one was very happy with it. But we settled that like adults outside of court. And, to this day, I'm still friends with people at the county, still friends, obviously, with people at Hoffman, even though I don't work there anymore, still friends with people at the design team. And we still have long-lasting relationships because of that good-willed approach where we knew there were better days coming that we brought to that really massive, challenging project every day.
Incredible. I appreciate you just sharing that story, multiple stories within that one project. And it just gives it so much more meaning when you can point to those moments and why relationships are so key. So appreciate you for coming on again, Josh. We're going to do one more episode and we'll kind of wrap up all of those principles that we talked about over those past 5-6 episodes that we've done together. And you also talk about Daring Greatly as well, Brene Brown's work, as well, kind of unpack all of that and wrap things up. So appreciate you coming on.
Sounds great, Brandon. Thanks for having me, man.
You bet. Hey, thanks so much for tuning in for today's episode of Transform Your Workplace. The content on this show is strictly for general information and educational purposes only, so that you can go transform your workplace in a positive way. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on the show are the guest's own and don't represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of either Xenium HR, the sponsor of the show, or me, the host, Brandon Laws. Additionally, Xenium HR or myself, Brandon Laws, doesn't endorse any guest, their business, or any organization they represent. So discretion is advised. We encourage you to work with a trusted advisor to find a custom approach that fits your organization's needs. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode.